in the infantry while I was in the Marine Corps from 03 to 07, and eventually became a 2nd Marine Division instructor after like lots of training, pretty much doing all the SOPs, doing all the command structure training that we needed. I'd say my specialty is probably battlefield improv, like adapt and overcome, if you will. And yeah, leave it to you there.
All right, good. So first thing we're going to do is go ahead and watch the video, and then we'll go ahead and analyze it with y'all real quick. So I'm going to go ahead and share our video. And all right, can we all see it?
Yep.
All right, let's go ahead and play. Sound on. And there's no sound.
That's okay.
Yeah. What's going on?
We can talk it, Ian.
Yeah,
All right.
no problem. Just leave it
So-
playing in the background and we'll talk.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Go ahead, Jake.
Okay, so there's a couple things. There's also another video that shows a different angle. That kind
Do
of
you want to
shows.
describe what we're seeing real quick, Jake?
Yeah, I'm gonna get there in just a second. So the video that you saw right there, that's after the suspect gets out of his vehicle and approaches that deputy and covers probably 20 to 25 feet easy. That deputy initially makes contact with him as she pulls up behind him. She leaves a good amount of distance, probably 2 car lengths between the two of their vehicles. After he stops, he exits his vehicle and starts approaching. And right away, she can see that he's got at least 2 knives and a screwdriver or ice pick or some other stabbing weapon in his hand. So that kind of leads into, you know, why she would have been weapons out at that point. You know, at that distance, he can cover that distance pretty quickly and still be able to get to her. What you guys saw in the video, that's as he's standing at the front right here. That's him at the front of the vehicle, and you can see his body language change pretty quickly. He kind of does his little hop step and then immediately charges the deputy. In that time, she's got both hands on her gun on that time and fires a series of rounds, and then she encounters a malfunction. She clears the malfunction, fires a couple more rounds. So we'll kind of get more into that as we go through. But in a nutshell, that's kind of what happened with this incident.
All right. So, Jake, you did mention the distance. Do you think that 2 car lengths, was that a fair? Of course, we say the word fair. Do you think that was? Do you think that was a good distance to switch from? I'm trying to stop him, giving verbal commands, and switching to lethal force.
Yeah, I think, you know, when she made the initial stop, she stopped well behind that suspect vehicle. And I think that's a great distance to stop at. You know, that gives her plenty of ability to be able to exit her squad car and kind of see what's going on, or stay in the squad car and use the car as a deterrent if needed. With the suspect immediately exiting the vehicle and not having a firearm in his hand, I think she, and again, I'm kind of guessing, but I think she felt comfortable being able to exit the squad and at that point start giving him verbal commands. Yeah, I think her initial distance was very good.
Now, how about the way she, now moving does, of course, give you a less stable platform to shoot from. Do you think she was correct in the way that she moved back as she brought her weapon up and fired several rounds at him? You think that was a smart thing to do?
I think initially it was. Obviously she couldn't move to her right. The squad car was right there. Moving diagonally to the left may, and it's a huge may, have afforded her a little bit better, opportunity. But again, if she moves to the left, now she has to consider what her backdrop is, and her backdrop is going to constantly change. Moving directly back, her backdrop stayed the same. She was able to see what was behind her, what was in front of her, what was between her and him, and be able to effectively engage that individual.
All right. Now, a few people did make some comments in regards to her grip and how she had to readjust her grip and her shot placement in general. What's your opinion on all that?
So I think initially her grip was fine. And again, this is it's Michigan in the summertime. It's hot. She's not wearing any gloves, so I'm sure she's sweaty. She had just gotten done with a car chase to chase this guy down, so her adrenaline is spiking. She's probably looking at a heart rate of anywhere between 185 to 200 beats per minute, and that's going to start doing a lot of different things with that pistol in hand. I think she did what she needed to do initially and got done with what she needed to get done with. At 180 beats per minute, you're losing a lot of your fine motor skills. So that gun's going to feel like a brick in your hand, right? And unless you've been involved in gunfights over and over and over and over and over again, you're going to readjust your grip. I mean, that's just what's going to happen.
Now,
On the
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Rob. Go ahead.
yeah, on the experience level, Jake, you and I have trained for this scenario a few times with our work. But my partners, Bill Decker and Jason Fryer, out here at my gig, we do a demo, which I think is very helpful, and maybe it'll help the people listening or students in the future. I don't know, but we have, let's say, Jason will be facing downrange, and I'll be facing uprange, standing right next to him with my hand on his shoulder. And he's actually the one who taught me this. So I got to give him props because it really does work. And I hold a water bottle or something in my hand, and as soon as he feels my hand go off his shoulder, he tries to draw and accurately put 2 stopping shots on the target in front of him at 7 yards or closer. And then by the time he does the second shot, I drop whatever's in my hand, and then we all go ahead and evaluate that distance. And it's a shocking distance. Every time we do it, I'm like, wow, I'm a 70% disabled, former infantry Marine with tons of injuries, and I can cover that distance that quick, So when I watched that video with the opponent and the knife, I was actually pretty impressed with everything you said about physiological response, how quickly she was able to unholster that weapon from a retention holster, mind you, and get some shots downrange accurately enough to stop her opponent,
Now, actually, this is a good one for both of you. But when it comes to, I guess, hesitation, because that was another critique I've seen is hesitating. We did touch on that a little bit earlier at the beginning too, arguing about when she should have first fired shots. Do you think, and again, this is an assumption on our part because we don't know her background, but I'd say it's a pretty fair, likely assumption that this was her first officer-involved shooting. Do you think there is a psychological barrier to overcome when it comes to a situation like that?
Oh, absolutely. We've seen research time and time again where it is not a normal human response to want to kill someone or to actively, try to kill someone. And I'm sure, with what's going on in the country right now, all of this is playing out in her mind, and I think that's why she gave so many commands and had allowed that guy to get that close. We've seen it in other shootings, other officer involved shootings in the past, where the officers have been killed because they had that in their head, or they had a department policy that was extremely restrictive, and they're not able to do what it is they need to do against an armed adversary that is actively trying to kill them. And they end up worse for wear. Now, you know, there's different times you can pause in the video and kind of see her grip kind of come loose. But again, you know, here's the other part that she's probably going through her head. What do we instinctively do if somebody swings something at us, right? We take our hand away from wherever it is and take that support hand away and try to catch it, or try to block it, or try to do something with it. So there's a multitude of different things that are occurring in these couple of seconds that happen, that, you know, being involved in some of these things, you know, now granted, I never had to discharge my weapon on duty. I had a fair amount of training, and it can go to hell real fast, and you have to train and train and train. Now, she's an experienced law enforcement officer. She's been around for 22 years on this department, or in general, I think. And overall, she handled herself very well. I don't see anything in the video that really gives me a lot of concern. But again, I mean, anybody can nitpick it however they want to. It's easy to do so from kind of the comfort of my house, you know?
Well, I agree with you there. Just the ability to overcome that autonomic response is pretty tough. So, you know, I wouldn't like propose to know what was necessarily going through her head, just like, you know, the rest of you. But I can say from the outcome, dangerous opponent, determined opponent, close range. You know, we can sit here and nitpick what ifs and, you know, Monday night quarterback this, or a couch commander this all day we want. But like, I think, you know, let me ask you a question, Jake, on your end, law enforcement wise. I mean, you know, you're saying it's kind of like discretionary by department, how the training goes and funding and, you know, training areas and all that. So would you like suggest that officers come on their free time, or I mean, like, how do you see getting around that little training gap?
So a lot of what our guys would do, and myself included, is we would go and find our own training. We would find people in the Midwest. We would find other trainers throughout the country that we could go and get training from. That way we could increase our skill sets. And, you know, it really played into getting better and getting it just a different mindset, different outlook. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that was one of the things that for our department, we really had to spend the money. We had to spend the time. Guys would take time off. They'd spend their own money. They would drive. But again, luckily we had a training cadre that did give a damn about us as officers, did, you know, want to make sure that we were given the best training that they could possibly give us, but who also were very frank with the fact that, you know, the city's budget wasn't going to allow for all the training that we wanted to do, or they wanted to do. So it was incumbent on us to go and find other training, to go and get different perspectives and learn different things.
Now, this is a good one for both of you. When it comes to that speed reload or that emergency reload, what y'all think of that?
The malfunction clearance, I think she did well. You know, I think she recognized in the video, you can see her still try to pull that trigger, but I think you can also see, if you're looking for it, she kind of tilts the gun up a little bit, and she recognizes, shit, my weapon has malfunctioned. And she realizes that it's not an empty gun, but that there are rounds in there, and it has failed to extract, or it's failed to feed, or whatever the malfunction is. So she immediately goes into the slap rack, you know, to get that fixed, and immediately comes back up. And I think she puts 3 or 4 more rounds on the guy. And she did it while moving, she did it while trying to avoid, initially, she did it while trying to avoid the knife coming at her from the suspect's right hand, also avoiding the knife and screwdriver that was in his right hand, or his left hand, excuse me. So I think she did fine. I think she did exactly what needed to be done and fixed it. I mean, she fixed the malfunction in, let me roll the video back, but I think the malfunction was fixed in about a second. Once she recognizes it, once she recognizes that it's a malfunction, she clears it in a second, which is exactly what we want people to do.
I think you kind of nailed it with the terminology there. I think one of our colleagues might have even said that in the past. It's an emergency reload. Why is it an emergency reload? Because my gun is empty or not working properly, and it's an emergency. And I like that. And I've kind of been using that since. We all talked about it a while ago. Just people get a little bit too wrapped up about what things mean and stuff. And I tend to agree with Jake. Like, she, looked down for just a second, realized that there was some malfunction happening. And in that situation, I think I might have done the same thing, rip the magazine out, clear the weapon, and reload. Who cares why? Just get it back in action.
Yeah, and in all actuality, she just literally slapped that mag, racked it, and went back to work. She didn't pull anything off her belt. She didn't mess around. Granted, could she have done it maybe a little bit closer to her body, given her a little bit more tensile strength, blah, 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 blah. Yes. I mean, like I said, there's a few different things that we can nitpick, but why? Like, she did exactly what she needed to do. She got her weapon system back up and operational, and she took care of the problem right then.
Now, what would you two say, and especially Jake, what would you say? You did mention the departments earlier. Do you think there's anything aside from the individual, what the departments should be doing when it comes to training for situations like this?
But there's definitely some low cost options that are available. And that's, really that's the crux of the problem, right? It's the cost of training that is really what gets people hurt. It gets people not as good as they could be. Really there needs to be a lot more time dedicated to game playing this. I know there were plenty of times on nights where we really didn't have a whole lot of things going on. 2 squads could meet up. You could go over either general orders, or you can go over training. You could go over scenarios. You can do all these different types of things and be able to, get yourself better. But that's what it's really going to come down to, especially in, with the political climate as is. Until there's a dramatic shift, cops are going to be on the street by themselves, having to fix these problems, and they're going to have to come up with ways to train it better. And it really comes down to, deputies and officers training each other and going over this stuff and finding training, going out and finding those people that can train them, going out and finding scenario-based training schools and courses that are going to give them the opportunity to go force on force, to have sim rounds coming back at them or UTMs coming back at them, and make them evaluate and push their decision-making process to the brink and make them think a lot faster, or at least make them recognize things a lot faster.
Well, you kind of touched on something real quick. I wanted to ask your opinion on what you thought about officers patrolling by themselves, because here in Toledo, just a couple weekends ago, we had, of course, this is how it usually plays out. We had one of the good cops, and there are many. He was shot in the neck by an opponent that just did a little bit of drunken intuitive fire. First shot hit him right in the neck. He returned fire, but was already going down. And people were pretty sad here. Let's just say that. But one of the things that came out of that was the city's discussing officers on the street and on patrol doing it together, like as a team now, instead of single, which I always thought was like, man, that would defeat so many anxieties and just issues. I always thought with a little bit of like, partnered up action.
So, yeah, and I totally agree with that. Again, the problem is that departments are spread pretty thin right now. A lot of departments don't have enough people to roll two to a car. And in the video, you can hear all the other squad cars that are on their way to where she is. Um, you know, she just happened to come across this guy, got the pursuit started, and he chose to end the pursuit right there and get into that conflict with her, get into that standoff with her. And that's the other part. A lot of these county deputies, they work vast areas by themselves, and their backup is 3, 4, 5 minutes away. Where city cops, usually we get pretty complacent in terms of having backup coming, because we get that expectation that we're going to have somebody there within a minute, 30 seconds ish. But again, that's going to boil down to department policy. That's going to boil down to manning. That's going to boil down to kind of the decisions that are made with people wearing gold badges instead of silver badges.
Now, you did mention the two officers to a car, which of course would be very cost prohibitive. How much would you say funding is to blame when it comes to manning and training, both of those issues?
I think with training, I think the funding part of it is the biggest culprit. I don't think that there are very many departments out there that are willfully withholding training from their individual officers and deputies. In terms of riding two to a car, I think it's a 70-20 or 70-30 split between funding and then finding qualified individuals to ride in a squad car. It's the qualifications aren't real high, to be honest with you, but we weed out a lot of people every year that can't make it physically, can't make it through the background check, we had people applying that didn't even have a high school education or a GED, which is a bare minimum educational requirement. So I think that there's a bit of a societal issue in terms of looking at it and really making it a priority. So
yeah, how would you say, because when was your last year on the force? Like in the time in the past 14 years or so that you've been in law enforcement, military, and firearms instruction, would you say there's been improvements in all of this and everything we've talked about tonight?
yeah, I think definitely. You look at some of the historical cases. A big one that jumps out is the FBI shooting down in Miami-Dade County. There were so many training scars that those guys carried with them. Ejecting the empty casings into their hand so they could put them in their left pocket, and then reaching into their right pocket with their other hand to load their rounds individually, because that's how they always did it on the range. I think that there's been a big shift in training. I think there's been a big focus on making the training realistic, making the training applicable, and then making the training halfway affordable. You look at some of the departments that are out there, and they do the best they can with what they got. But training has come a long way from 2003 when I first started.
You still with us?
That makes sense? You got me?
Yep. Yeah, you just cut out for a second. It's all good.
Sorry.
Raph, what do you think? And from a military perspective, because all these things go hand in hand. Because since you have people rolling back and forth from law enforcement to military, vice versa, private security, there's a mishmash of people going back and forth between all these industries. So from your perspective, have you seen any improvements in training that military service members, contractors, and the other roles that you've been in the past decade or so?
Yeah, I have seen a shift. Naturally, a lot of even though it's like a small percentage, a larger percentage than before served in the most recent engagements the United States was involved in overseas, right? So naturally, when terms and conditions are up and your contracts are up, you're going to get out and you're going to find different jobs. A lot of guys like myself, we went into security detail because that is the next closest thing to being in the military or some other paramilitary force or organization. You just kind of ease into getting back into it, I guess. There's another thing I wanted to just talk about with the question you just asked was, I found that it's a perception versus reality situation 9 times out of 10. The perception is that cops are looking good and their squad car's clean and they look presentable and they come and they have like a position of authority and a kind of an air of an authority, right? Figure. And I think that's the perception most civilians have of just them, the military, Marines, where have you, that we're just like very highly skilled, very highly trained. Well, yeah, in some regards we are, but Jake can probably attest to this, that anytime you've been in a shooting house, 25% of the time, you could play the Benny Hill song over the radio. It's just that
Absolutely.
hilarious. Magazines are falling off, people are tripping, trying to hold each other up, the door didn't cave in the right way, and on and on and on. But the reason the shoot house exists is so we can do the training there. 25% of the time, if it gets screwed up, you'd figure 75% of the time it goes well. And I'd say maybe 20% of the time it actually goes smoothly, right? No operation ever goes smoothly. So again, getting back to that perception versus reality, the perception is that the police are overfunded and they're militarized, and those things happen after a war, right? All that equipment, all that knowledge, all those people have to go somewhere. So they end up doing these kind of jobs, and that's kind of part of the reason why we're in the situation we're in, I suppose. Um, just defeating that perception is kind of what I've been trying to do lately. Is it's all about training. It comes back to training. You're going to default to your lowest level of standard of training when there's an emergency. Just to go back to that video, you can tell she had worked the emergency reloads and she had worked, her different failures to stop, at least enough that she fell back on it within 3-4 seconds, I think. So did
Yeah,
that
I mean,
answer your question, Jake? Oh,
yeah, she recognized the issue pretty quickly, and she cleared the malfunction in a short amount of time.
she obviously took the training seriously, right? So it's like,
Yeah.
and going back to that, you're only going to be as good as the effort you put in. So if you're taking training seriously and then you take it seriously upon yourself to go get extra training at the end, that much better on you. Now, I've seen high-end operators get shot by guys running, and shooting over their back. So it's kind of like a roll of the dice at the same time.
Now, you have brought up training scars. Did you see any training scars in that video?
Maybe not training scars, but definitely maybe a little bit of input overload, if that makes sense. If you listen to the video initially, there is another angle that's body camera that I think is a really good angle to see, because you can actually hear the audio as soon as he steps out of the vehicle and as soon as she starts giving commands. She gets fixated on the drop it, drop it, drop it, drop it, drop it. Now you hear him respond, drop what? Drop what? And then he just starts parroting everything that she is telling him. That in terms of that being a training scar, I don't think it is, but I think it's definitely, and Raph can probably attest to this in terms of being on a scope too long. We get what they call scope lock, right? You get fixated on that scope, you get fixated on what you're seeing through that tube, and you start to lose all the peripheral stuff that's happening, especially when things kick up real fast. And again, going back to her physiological response, her heart rate's probably spiking over 200 beats per minute, right? For a normal individual, that's going to start shutting down cognitive abilities and cognitive processing to understand exactly what's in front of you and make good decisions. That's one of the things that a lot of people, they keep yelling and screaming that cops need to do this, they need to shoot the gun out of the person's hand, or they need to hit him in the toe or whatever. I mean, we have a political presidential candidate that just said, well, I'll just shoot him in the shoulder or shoot the gun out of their hand. you can't see it, and you can't necessarily make that good of a decision. There are world-class shooters that as soon as you put them on the two-way range, their skill sets completely fall apart because they've never been exposed to somebody else shooting back at them. In this instance, I guarantee you, if I take a lot of competition shooters that have never been on a two-way range or never been exposed to that kind of violence, I'm going to probably be able to do some damage on them. They'll probably outshoot me because they're really, really good shooters. But at the end of the day, if I come through a door, if I kick in a door and I come at them with a knife, probably gonna do some damage to them real fast before they're able to do a whole lot to me.
There's really a lot of overlap in so many things that are, I guess, athleticism, awareness, combat prowess, accuracy shooting. I mean, that's just the shooting part, right? So I tend to agree with you. There's, like I said, I've personally tried to keep my training as diverse as possible. I do a little bit of competition shooting. I got the security detail and the military background. But again, that perception is, yeah, you're going to shoot some gun out of somebody's hand. Even in sniper platoon, that was a risky maneuver, risky at best. And it wasn't something. Yeah, go ahead.
Is that something they actually do outside of movies, trying to shoot a gun out of someone's hands?
No. So what we did, I think the only kind of training that was similar to that was we had a board that we would put some golf balls on of different colors, and then just naturally they're moving around. There's another game that we used to play that was we had an RC car on the range, and what we would do was tie a green balloon or a red balloon, and as you're driving around, the balloons are moving, and the instructor will say, shoot the red balloon as it's moving up and down on the RC car. That's a difficult evolution, that one. But that's kind of what this is based around. Like, hitting a target that has a hostage is really what we train to do. But I guess if you're being that accurate, you could try to shoot a gun out of somebody's hand. There's a couple of instances out there. I think you could probably find them on YouTube, where there are police snipers and such that have shot firearms out of people's hands, but it's been very unique circumstances,
Very static, very controlled, very, that.
Yeah, I think there was one
running
in Cincinnati or something where the guy was sitting in a chair in the middle of the road. I mean, it couldn't get much easier than that, something.
Exactly.
Now, Jake, what you said earlier about how she got fixated, or you were talking about scope fixation. You also talked about how she was getting fixated on her commands, drop the weapon, drop the weapon. It reminds me of, does happen in combat too. Like if you look at Battle of Gettysburg, or even the Civil War in general, when they were still using bore-loaded weapons, you'd have cases where you'd have soldiers who hadn't fired a shot the entire battle. What they'd been doing is they were just loading and loading and loading. So their bores had 8 or 9 or 10 of the balls in it. They were just doing that one step over and over, and forgetting to even shoot it.
Part of that, and part of that comes into that whole hesitation of killing somebody is not a natural experience or not a natural desire with any human being. I mean, we look at it, and in that instance, those guys were fighting cousins, brothers, nephews, relatives, people that lived in their own towns or lived in their same states or area. So there's a multitude of different facets to that. But yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where she got a little bit fixated on the commands and nothing was changing, right? And at that point, if nothing is changing and you are giving the same command over and over and over and over again, maybe try to, change up your tactic a little bit, but you definitely need to start moving. That is a huge warning sign to start saying, hey, this person is fixated on doing me harm or ignoring what it is that I'm telling them, even if I have a gun pointed directly at them. So in terms of like civilian side, right? Because ultimately that's kind of what we're doing. We're training civilians now. People need to understand that just because you point a gun at someone and just because you give them commands doesn't mean they're going to follow those commands. And you have to figure out a way or a secondary or tertiary plan of action once that doesn't work.
Now, Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead. You go
No,
right
that's
ahead.
it. I mean, I was just gonna say, it's a little bit of the mentality too. Like Jake was saying, civilian versus paramilitary. Like cops know what they're getting into, right? When you're walking around, you better not have, this is what I tell my CCW instructors or students, and actually, I don't even say this. Jason Fryer, who teaches my CCW courses, he says this, and he keeps it real and he keeps it simple with the students. And it's an attitude thing. In Ohio, it is your obligation to retreat if you have a firearm on you as a civilian. It is your obligation to retreat until you are cornered like an animal.
You have
You
a
know,
duty to retreat.
you do.
In
You
Iowa,
do.
you don't. Yeah, and that's
Right.
where you're going to have different instances across the country, and you're going to have different laws and different qualifications or different standards and stuff like that. So
I
that's
think
where
that
it's
just with the political atmosphere, we see a lot of people on one side freaking out about a lot of people on the other side, and it's very reactionary, right? So it's like, the moderate way of doing things, especially training wise, is you don't expect one type of scenario. You're trying to just kind of look out, right? Head on a swivel, just looking out. Not necessarily even for trouble. Just watch your back, Jack. And
right.
like I'll say, like people who are bellicose or belt-fed people need not apply to that kind of thing, in my opinion.
Yeah. So it's it's situational awareness. It's that kind of stuff, and we teach that stuff. How many times, Raf, did you guys get beat over the head with situational awareness, essay, making sure that you read the environment that you're in, right? And to that note, as soon as that guy exited the vehicle the way that he did, he had ill intent. You could see the ill intent. Whether whether you process it right away or you kind of see it later, that's a different issue. But it's really getting into the root of the problem to make sure that people understand you have to be situationally aware. And if you do that, you're ahead of the game most times.
Now, in that case, that did seem like a classic suicide by cop type scenario. He's I'm going down. I might take her with me. I might not, kind of situation. I've not seen any updates on that. Was that drugs? Was that mental illness? Did we get any follow-ups on what that dude's deal was?
Not sure. To me, what it was, and again, this is just me speaking my own little piece, but to me, it was he was a determined adversary. He knew that based on the egregious or felonious assault that he had just committed, he was going to jail. Like he was going to get rolled up and he was going to jail. If it was just a simple decision on his part, I'm not going to jail and you're going to have to kill me, we don't know. That none of that information has been released yet, and I don't know if we ever will know, to be honest with you, just because it wasn't something that was very clearly stated or clearly covered. So.
And and again, as someone who's been on the beat like yourself, is that something you've typically run into? And I would imagine being in someone like that shoes, once you've done something like that, whether you lost your temper on someone or whatever the case may be, and you did end up doing something like that, even if you hadn't woken up that day intending to do something like that, and after you have done something like that, you've committed that serious crime against someone, and then at that point you're just like, well, I mean, I'm not going to jail.
Yeah, I mean,
like,
there's a multitude.
How do you even go about like trying to de-escalate that when you have someone who's past that point?
You're not. You're once you have a determined adversary, you're just not going to de-escalate.
Mm-hmm.
The only way you're going to de-escalate that is by trying to go hands-on with the individual and get cut, get stabbed, and now you're in a big bloody mess. You're in a big bloody fight that they still have an edged weapon. So, if they start showing signs where they're going to stop the attack, he didn't stop the attack. He came straight at her. He had committed to that attack on that officer. And then even after being shot, he went back down, or he bent back down to pick up the weapon to continue the fight. Well, she did exactly what she needed to.
Can't get more determined than that. After getting shot, he still was intent on harm.
It looked like he got shot multiple times. I mean, she unloaded on him. Did we get any kind of autopsy report back? I didn't see one.
They won't release anything for a while, not until the investigation's concluded. But just having watched the video a few times, I think I counted 8 or 10 shots. All of them were at relatively close range. Her last 3 were right there at the end, and that's really what kind of finished the dude off. But again, wounds don't just automatically start bleeding. You know what I mean? Like, she may have hit him 3, 4, 5 times, and you may not even know it. You may not even see it, depending on clothing, depending on color of clothing, depending on angle, depending on all kinds of things. You may not even see that right away.
Now, when I watched it, it looked like he was at a bit of a profile to her too. So if she's aiming for that classic upper thoracic cavity, that's not easy to hit from where he was at in relation to her. For a good chunk
she's
of
gonna
that
have
chase.
and she's gonna have to shoot through his arms, his hands. There's a lot of bone. There's all kinds of stuff that's being presented to her in kind of a negative, I hate to say it this way, but in a negative fashion for maximum impact or maximum effectiveness of those rounds. So
Pull the trigger and go, right? When your back's against the wall and someone's coming at you, it's very typical. And you can't say that I wouldn't do the same thing. I'd be shooting through the car, maybe even. Who knows?
Yeah,
How about the cadence of her shots? What did you think of that?
It was fine. I think if you have somebody that's maybe a little bit more experienced, they might shoot a little bit faster. But at the end of the day, I think she shot to end the problem, and the cadence ended the problem.
Yeah. Now, Raph, what do you think? Being in a close quarters fight like that, again, I don't know and you've definitely trained for these scenarios. I don't know what in real life, what scenarios you've run into, but you've definitely trained for those room clearings, those close quarters, ECP type situations. What did you think of that?
So, security detail world-wise, I suppose, like one of the things I practice a lot for is close contact and close range engagements on the range. That's kind of weird, I know, because of my background, but I always found that like drills like the Mozambique drill or modified Mozambique drills, which if for our people listening in, a Mozambique is pretty much what we mean by Mozambique or close contact is that you draw out of the holster and the firearm is still next to your side or ribs, or you're hovering over it and it's not fully extended yet in both hands. That's if an opponent's at close range to you. And I actually thought about that a little bit when we were watching that video, but she reacted and, extended in time while he was closing distance. So, but again, Mozambique drill, I practiced that a lot. And I used to practice that quite a bit for the previous jobs, because you can expect somebody to try to get in close to you or your principal to try to do some damage. And that's where it goes down, is at close range, and if there's something long range popping off, we just cover and run. We're not trying to get in any kind of engagements. Part of the reason I kind of enjoyed that kind of training and work was because it was a little bit more realistic to like how the world is, versus like when you're in the military, you're kind of training for like a different type of scenario where you're showing up en masse with all your buddies. And when you're doing that other kind of work, it's a little bit more personal. You kind of blend in a little bit. Most of my gear, my firearms, was underneath a long shirt or a button up or something like that, Real quick too, I thought it was interesting that you kind of briefly mentioned just a little bit of emotional sickness, I suppose. There's a lot of people who are emotionally sick out there too. You can't really predict what they're going to be doing. So the best way to do it is just to get, training for a million different scenarios is not going to work. You just got to do what's best for you, which is usually escape and evade, in my opinion.
Yeah, you just create space, man. Create space.
Now, I'm reading a book by Don Vandergriff, who's a retired Army colonel, I believe, about mission command. So he's talking, of course, obviously more about military organizations, about military leadership, military staff. And what you said, Raph, kind of reminded me of that, though. When you're trained, and something he was really emphasizing is that you're training your personnel to have drills. So like you said, you can't train for a million different scenarios, but they have those drills that are ingrained to them, but which are to some extent by definition are predictable, but also they have that creativity and critical thinking that they can respond and adapt to unusual situations. So you have that mix of drill and initiative and critical thinking to be able to function. And of course, he was talking about combat specifically, but do you think that between the two of you, do you think that applies equally well to here being on the street, law enforcement, or just a civilian, a self-defense type situation?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, the more stress inoculation that you can put on yourself in your training, the better the training will be. And just the better ability you'll have to process so many more things outside of training. You don't
My
always
frustrations in the Marines was not being able to think for everybody that was under me. That was really frustrating. You can only teach people so much critical thinking, right, Jake?
Absolutely.
Now, this case does in some way contrast to one that happened some years ago. It was the what was his name? It was the Tamir Rice shooting, officer involved shooting. And it seems to me, watching this video, and again, for the audience, those of you not familiar with the Tamir Rice shooting, it was a case, I forget what state it was in. There's this boy holding a toy gun. Officer rolled up his patrol car, rolled up right adjacent to the boy, and was actually shooting his gun as he was falling out of his vehicle. Like he swung open door, guns blazing. It seems to me, at least my opinion, she handled this one a bit better. She put some distance between herself and was able to assess things a little bit better. So do you think the distance, what would you say is just when you're approaching a situation, you don't know what exactly you're walking into? What do you think in general you should be thinking about as far as distance, where you're going to stop in relation to the person you're dealing with?
I don't know if there's any set distance. I mean, that's where your training has to come into play. You have to train that. You have to figure out for you and your ability and your skill set and, where you stand, you have to figure out where it is that you can operate effectively. I get very cautious when I hear people start talking about, well, you have to do it at 15 feet, or you have to do this, that, or the other. Maybe is kind of my answer, but at the end of the day, it's one of those things where that's the training part that has to come into play. You have to train that, and you really have to pay attention to what you're doing.
All right. I hear the kiddos coming home. Is there anything else you two want to add here real quick at the end of this?
I just want to say thanks for putting this together, Ian. I know we had some technical difficulties at the beginning, but I greatly appreciate all the effort and time that you spent on this.
Oh yeah, and definitely for those of you who tuned in to listen, I appreciate the patience at the beginning. We had some technical difficulties. I did this out of a hotel, and what ended up happening is we were spamming like multiple YouTube videos. It was a bit of a mess. So I appreciate everybody's patience, and we are going to continue having podcasts about different current events. If you have a topic, past, present, or future, that you would like us to do a podcast about, definitely email us, message us on Facebook, shoot us an email on the website, gunslingers.net, or gunslingerusa.net. And thank you for listening in.
Yep.
And we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. Everybody have a good night.
Thanks. See you guys later.
Thanks.
See you later.
See y'all.
See y'all.